Imagine being 6 years old. Imagine the taste of candy on your tongue, the warmth of the sun on your face, the sound of your brother's laughter echoing through a park. Now imagine that in a single moment, everything you know disappears. Your name, your family, your language, your past, all erased like words written in sand. On February 21st, 1951, a little boy named Luis Armando Albino vanished from an Oakland park. His brother watched him walk away with a stranger. His mother searched for him every single day for the rest of her life, and for 73 years, nobody knew if he was alive or dead, until a niece who refused to give up changed everything. This is the story of the longest solved kidnapping case in American history, a story of stolen childhoods, relentless hope, and a family reunited against impossible odds. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, because this story will surprise you from beginning to end. The morning of February 21st, 1951, started like any other day in West Oakland, California. The Albino family had only been in America for about a year, having left their native Puerto Rico in search of better opportunities. Antonia Albino, a determined mother of 6 children, was building a new life for her family in this unfamiliar land where the language was different and the streets were foreign. That afternoon, 6-year-old Luis Armando Albino and his 10-year-old brother Roger were given permission to play at the park near their home on Brush Street. The park was a safe haven for the neighborhood children, a place where immigrant families could watch their kids play while building community in this new world. Luis was a small boy with dark hair and bright eyes, still learning English but fluent in the Spanish of his homeland. He trusted easily, as children do. He believed in the kindness of strangers. Around mid-afternoon, as the boys played, a woman approached them. She was estimated to be in her 30s, wearing a bandana wrapped around her head. She began talking to the brothers, her voice friendly and warm. Then she made an offer that would change everything. She promised Luis that if he came with her, she would buy him candy. To a 6-year-old child, this wasn't a threat. It was an adventure. It was sweetness and kindness from a smiling stranger. Luis agreed to go with her. Roger, sensing something wasn't quite right, followed them for a while, watching as his little brother walked away with this unfamiliar woman. Eventually, uncertainty overtook him, and he turned back, running home to tell an adult about the strange encounter he had just witnessed. When Roger burst through the door and told his family what had happened, panic erupted. Antonia immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Within hours, Oakland police launched a massive search operation. Soldiers from a local army base were called in. The Coast Guard was dispatched. City employees joined the effort. They searched the waters around Jack London Square, combed through San Francisco Bay and several other bodies of water, convinced that perhaps the little boy had wandered to the water's edge and drowned. But young Roger stood by his story. Investigators interrogated him multiple times, pressing him for details, perhaps suspecting the 10-year-old might be confused or making things up. But Roger never wavered. A woman with a bandana, the promise of candy, his brother walking away. Each time they asked, he told them the same story, his voice steady even as his heart broke. Despite the enormous search effort, no trace of Luis Armando Albino was found. No body, no clothing, no witnesses came forward. It was as if the little boy had simply evaporated into thin air. The Oakland police, state authorities, and federal investigators uncovered no leads. The trail went completely cold. In the days and weeks that followed, Antonia Albino refused to accept that her son was gone. She became a constant presence at the police's missing person bureau. At first, she came every single day, asking if there was any news, any updates, any shred of hope. The answer was always the same: nothing. As days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, her daily visits became weekly, then monthly, then yearly. But she never stopped. She never gave up. She always felt he was alive, her granddaughter would later recall. She took that with her to her grave. The family kept Luis's memory alive in their home. Antonia carried the original newspaper article about his disappearance in her wallet for the rest of her life. A photograph of Luis hung on the wall of the family home, a constant reminder of the child who was missing. The family spoke of him often, keeping his name and his memory woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Every birthday that passed, every Christmas, every family gathering had an empty space where Luis should have been. In 1966, 15 years after the kidnapping, the family reinvigorated their search efforts. Luis would have been 21 years old by then, old enough to have potentially served in the military or taken exams that would create a paper trail. The family traveled to Puerto Rico multiple times, hoping that perhaps the kidnappers had taken Luis back to their homeland. But once again, they found nothing. Lieutenant Dominic DeFrea of the Oakland Police told the Oakland Tribune in 1966, "This is a rare situation when a boy disappears and doesn't eventually show up, alive or dead. I'd give an awful lot to find out why." Meanwhile, somewhere on the east coast of the United States, a little boy who had once been called Luis Armando Albino was growing up believing he was someone else entirely. While a family in California grieved and searched, a little boy was beginning a completely different life 3,000 miles away on the East Coast. The woman who had lured Luis away from that Oakland park had transported him across state lines, eventually bringing him to a couple who would raise him as their own son. What happened during that journey? How did a 6-year-old Spanish-speaking boy from Puerto Rico end up in the hands of strangers? These questions remain unanswered to this day. The couple who raised Luis have since passed away, taking most of the secrets with them. Luis himself would later report having some fragmented memories of being kidnapped and taken across the country, but the adults in his life never explained what had happened. They never told him the truth about who he really was. Imagine the profound disorientation of those early days. One moment, Luis was playing with his brother in a familiar park, speaking Spanish, surrounded by the sounds and smells of his Puerto Rican heritage. The next, he was in an entirely different world, with people who called him by a different name, in a place that bore no resemblance to anything he had known. At 6 years old, how do you process that kind of rupture? How do you hold on to a sense of self when everything around you is telling you that your memories aren't real? But children are remarkably adaptive. Their brains are wired for survival, for accepting the reality that's presented to them. Slowly, the boy who had been Luis Armando Albino became someone else. He learned English. He forgot most of his Spanish. The faces of his mother and siblings faded from his memory like photographs left too long in the sun. The park in Oakland became a dream, then a vague impression, then nothing at all. The couple who raised him became, in his mind, his parents. Their home became his home. Their story became his story. And in many ways, the life he built was a good one. He wasn't abused or neglected. He was raised with care. As he grew into adolescence and then young adulthood, he displayed the values that his biological mother would have been proud of: courage, service, dedication. When he became old enough, he joined the United States Marine Corps. This was during the height of the Vietnam War, one of the most turbulent periods in American history. He served not just one, but 2 tours in Vietnam, facing dangers that most people can't even imagine. He fought for a country that had, in a sense, been built on the theft of his identity. He displayed bravery and resilience, earning the respect of his fellow servicemen. After returning from the war, he chose another path of service. He became a firefighter, dedicating his life to protecting others, running into burning buildings when everyone else was running out. He was a hero in the truest sense of the word, saving lives and serving his community with distinction. Eventually, he retired with honor, having spent decades in service to others. He also built a family of his own. He fell in love, got married, and had children. Those children grew up and had children of their own, making him a grandfather. He attended school plays and birthday parties. He helped with homework. He passed down wisdom and love. He created a legacy. By all external measures, he had lived a full and meaningful life. But there was something he didn't know. There was a truth that had been buried so deep he couldn't even sense its absence. Somewhere in California, a family was still searching for him. A brother still remembered the day he walked away. A mother had died clutching a newspaper article about him. Nieces and nephews had grown up hearing his name, seeing his photograph on the wall, wondering what had happened to the uncle they had never met. Two parallel lives existed simultaneously, the life he was living and the life he had been stolen from. Both were real. Both shaped who he was. But for 73 years, these two realities never touched. They existed in completely separate universes, divided by a single moment in a park when a stranger offered candy to a trusting child. The FBI and Oakland Police Department would later close the missing person case, but the kidnapping investigation remains open to this day, because even though Luis was found alive and well, justice has not been served. The woman who took him, the couple who raised him knowing he was stolen, the circumstances that allowed a child to be transported across the country and given a new identity, all of this remains shrouded in mystery. What motivated the kidnapping? Was it a desperate woman who couldn't have children? Was it part of a larger network of child trafficking? Was it a random act of opportunity, or something more calculated? These questions haunt the case, and perhaps they always will. But for now, on the East Coast, a man was living his life, completely unaware that his existence was about to be turned upside down once again. He didn't know that thousands of miles away, a determined woman with his DNA was about to change everything. Alida Aliqueen grew up with a ghost in her family. Not a supernatural presence, but something equally haunting. The absence of an uncle she had never met. Her grandmother Antonia would speak of Luis often, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and stubborn hope. The newspaper clipping lived in Antonia's wallet, creased and yellowing, carried everywhere she went. The photograph hung on the wall. A small boy frozen forever at age 6, never growing older in that frame even as everyone around him aged. "I always knew I had an uncle," Alida would later explain. "We spoke of him a lot. My grandmother carried the original article in her wallet, and she always talked about him. A picture of him was always hung at the family home." Antonia Albino passed away in 2005 at the age of 92. She died never knowing what had happened to her son, never getting the closure she had sought for over 5 decades. The not knowing is sometimes worse than the worst truth. At least with truth, you can grieve, you can mourn, you can find some form of peace. But with an unanswered question, the wound never fully closes. But Antonia's determination didn't die with her. It lived on in her granddaughter. Alida inherited something precious from her grandmother: the refusal to give up, the belief that truth matters, the conviction that family is worth fighting for, even across decades, even across impossible odds. In 2020, Alida made a decision that seemed simple at the time. Online DNA testing had become popular, with companies promising to unlock the secrets of your ancestry, to connect you with distant relatives you never knew existed. Alida decided to take one of these tests, just for fun, as she would later describe it. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She was just curious about her heritage, interested in seeing what the test might reveal about her family's genetic history. When the results came back, something unusual appeared. The test showed a 22% DNA match with a man she had never met. In DNA terms, a 22% match is significant. It typically indicates a close familial relationship: an uncle, a half-sibling, a grandparent. But Alida knew all of her uncles. She knew her family tree. This man was a stranger. Or was he? A thought began to form in her mind, a possibility so extraordinary it seemed almost impossible. Could this stranger be her missing uncle? Could Luis Armando Albino, the boy who had vanished in 1951, still be alive? She tried to reach out to the man through the DNA testing platform, but received no response. The mystery deepened. She could see this person existed, could see the genetic connection between them, but couldn't bridge the gap to make contact. Eventually, she let it go, filing it away as an interesting but unsolvable puzzle. 4 years passed. The DNA match sat in the back of her mind, occasionally resurfacing but never quite demanding action. And then in early 2024, something shifted. Alida watched a documentary about a cold case that had been solved through DNA testing and genealogical research. The story reignited something in her. Why had she given up so easily? Why had she let that 22% match remain unexplored? She talked to her daughters, and together they made a decision. They would investigate. They would do what previous generations of police officers and federal agents had failed to do. They would find Luis Armando Albino. Their first stop was the Oakland Public Library. There, in the quiet stacks where microfilm preserves the past, Alida and her daughters began to dig through old newspaper archives. They scrolled through the Oakland Tribune from 1951, searching for anything related to the kidnapping. And they found it. Articles about the missing boy, photographs of Luis and Roger, details about the massive search effort. One particular photograph stopped Alida's heart. It showed two young boys, Luis and Roger, before the kidnapping. The resemblance to the DNA match was unmistakable. The shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the way he held himself. This wasn't just a genetic coincidence. This was family. That same day, armed with her research and her conviction, Alida walked into the Oakland Police Department. She presented her evidence, the DNA match, the old newspaper articles, the photographs. She made her case. And to her relief, the investigators took her seriously. They could see what she saw. This wasn't a wild theory from a hopeful relative. This was a legitimate lead, the first real break in the case in over 70 years. A new missing persons case was officially opened. The Oakland Police Department began working with the FBI and the California Department of Justice. They started searching through public records, looking for any trace of the man who matched Alida's DNA. They collected DNA samples from Luis's living siblings, including Alida's mother. They tried multiple times to make contact with the man directly, but had no success. Finally, FBI special agents were dispatched to the man's residence on the East Coast. They knocked on his door, explained who they were, and asked if they could talk to him. They requested a DNA sample. The man, now nearly 80 years old, agreed. The DNA was processed and compared to samples from his siblings. And on June 20, 2024, investigators arrived at the home of Alida's mother with news that would change everything. Imagine being told that your entire understanding of your family history is about to change, that someone you thought was lost forever has been found, that the impossible has become possible. When the investigators arrived at Alida's mother's home on June 20, 2024, they carried with them the weight of 73 years of questions. Alida was there with her mother, both women knowing something significant was about to happen, but not daring to fully believe it until they heard the words. The DNA results were definitive. The man on the East Coast was indeed Luis Armando Albino. The 6-year-old boy who had vanished from an Oakland park in 1951 had been found. He was alive. He had been alive this entire time, living a full life just 3,000 miles away. In my heart, I knew it was him, Alida would later say. And when I got the confirmation, I let out a big, yes. For a moment, the two women held themselves together, maintaining composure in front of the investigators. They listened to the details, asked their questions, processed the information with as much calm as they could manage. But the moment the investigators left, the dam broke. We didn't start crying until after the investigators left, Alida recalled. I grabbed my mom's hands and said, "We found him." I was ecstatic. For Alida's mother, the emotional complexity must have been overwhelming. This was her brother, a person she had never known but had heard about her entire life. He had been stolen before she was even born, but his absence had shaped her childhood, her family, her mother's grief. And now he was real. Not a photograph on the wall or a story told at family gatherings, but a living, breathing person. 4 days later, on June 24, 2024, with assistance from the FBI, Luis traveled to Oakland with members of his own family. The reunion was arranged carefully, with sensitivity to the enormous emotional weight everyone was carrying. This wasn't just a happy ending to a mystery. This was the collision of two complete lives, two separate realities that had existed in parallel for more than 7 decades. Luis met Alida first, the niece who had refused to give up, who had solved the mystery that had eluded professional investigators for so long. The moment was simple and profound. He hugged her, looked into her eyes, and said words that Alida will carry with her forever. "Thank you for finding me." Then he kissed her on the cheek. A gesture of gratitude, of recognition, of connection across a gap that should have been unbridgeable. But the reunion everyone had been waiting for was yet to come. The next day, Alida drove her mother and Luis to Stanislaus County, to the home of Roger Albino. Roger, now 83 years old, had been the last person to see Luis before he disappeared. He had been just 10 years old when he watched his little brother walk away with a stranger. He had been interrogated by police who didn't believe his story. He had lived for 73 years with the memory of that day, with the guilt that perhaps he should have done something different, fought harder, run faster. When the two brothers saw each other, time collapsed. The decades between them disappeared. They grabbed each other and had a really tight, long hug, Alida described. They sat down and just talked. What do you say to a brother you haven't seen in 73 years? How do you bridge that gap? They talked about the day of the kidnapping, about what Roger remembered and what Luis had been told. They talked about their military service. Both had served their country, both had faced combat, both had come home. They talked about their lives, their families, their experiences. Roger had been diagnosed with cancer. He was facing the end of his life, and he knew it. But now, finally, he had the answer to the question that had haunted him since childhood. His brother was alive. His story had been true all along. The woman with the bandana had been real. The promise of candy had been the lure. Everything he had said, everything he had remembered, had been exactly right. Luis returned to the East Coast after that initial reunion, but he came back to California in July for a 3-week visit. It was during this visit that he spent more time with Roger, building the relationship they had been denied, creating memories to replace the ones that had been stolen. In August 2024, Roger Albino passed away. He died 2 months after finally reuniting with his brother, 2 months after receiving the closure he had sought for an entire lifetime. "I think he died happily," Alida said. He was at peace with himself, knowing that his brother was found. The Oakland Police Department issued a statement acknowledging Alida's crucial role in solving the case. "The outcome of this story is what we strive for," they said. "It was a rare victory in a field where so many cases remain forever unsolved, where so many families never get answers. But questions remain. The missing person case may be closed, but the kidnapping investigation is still open. Who was the woman who took Luis? Why did she do it? How was she connected to the couple who raised him? Were there others involved? Did they know he was stolen, or did they believe they were rescuing a child? These questions may never be answered. The people who hold those secrets are likely dead, their motivations buried with them." The story of Luis Armando Albino forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about identity, memory, and truth. Who was Luis? Was he the 6-year-old Puerto Rican boy stolen from an Oakland park? Or was he the man raised on the East Coast, the Marine who served in Vietnam, the firefighter who saved lives? The answer, of course, is that he was both, and he was neither. He was something more complex than either identity could contain. When we talk about kidnapped children, we often focus on the moment of taking, the hand reaching out, the promise of candy, the car driving away. But the real theft isn't just the physical removal of a child from one place to another. It's the theft of continuity. It's the severing of a story mid-sentence, leaving everyone involved to wonder how it might have ended. Luis lived a good life by most measures. He served his country with honor. He saved lives as a firefighter. He raised a family. He became a grandfather. These aren't the achievements of a destroyed person. These are the accomplishments of someone who built something meaningful out of the circumstances he was given. But we can never know who he might have been if that day in the park had ended differently. Would he have become a different kind of hero? Would he have spoken Spanish to his children and taught them about their Puerto Rican heritage? Would he have been shaped by the immigrant experience of his family, by the struggle and triumph of building a new life in America, while maintaining connection to the old one? And what about Roger? For 73 years, he carried the weight of being the only witness. He saw his brother disappear. He told his story again and again to skeptical investigators. He lived with the question of whether there was something more he could have done. The reunion with Luis gave him peace, but it couldn't give him back those lost decades. It couldn't erase the guilt he may have carried. It couldn't restore the childhood brotherhood that was stolen from both of them. For Antonia Albino, the resolution came too late. She died in 2005, 19 years before her son was found. She never got to hold him again. She never got to hear his voice or see the man he had become. She never got to meet his children or her great-grandchildren. The newspaper clipping she carried in her wallet for over 5 decades was a monument to unresolved grief. Her daily, then weekly, then monthly, then yearly trips to the police department were a ritual of hope against hope. She believed Luis was alive because the alternative was unbearable, and she was right, but she never knew she was right. This raises a profound question about closure. Is it enough that the truth was eventually discovered, even if the person who most needed to know it didn't live to receive it? Alida believes that in some way, her grandmother knew. She always felt he was alive, Alida said. She took that with her to her grave. Perhaps there's comfort in that. Perhaps a mother's intuition, that deep knowing that defies logic and evidence, is its own form of truth. The case also illuminates the power of modern technology to reach back through time and solve mysteries that seemed permanently unsolvable. In 1951, DNA testing didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. Genealogical databases didn't exist. The tools that eventually led to Luis's discovery wouldn't be invented for decades. The investigators who searched for him in the 1950s and 1960s did everything they could with the resources available to them, but they were fighting against impossible odds. The woman who took Luis could transport him across the country, give him a new identity, and unless someone physically recognized him, there was no way to find him. He could be hidden in plain sight, living a normal life under a different name, and nobody would ever know. But now we live in an age where our DNA tells stories about us whether we want it to or not, where a simple test taken just for fun can unlock secrets buried for generations, where anyone with internet access and determination can do investigative work that would have required entire police departments in previous eras. Alida Aliquin became the detective her family needed. She had the tools that her grandmother didn't have, and she had the determination that her grandmother had taught her by example. Luis himself has chosen to remain private. He hasn't spoken to the media about his experience. He hasn't shared the full details of his memories or his feelings about discovering his true identity. This is his right. After a lifetime of having his story stolen from him, he gets to decide how much of it he shares. But we can imagine the complexity of his emotions. How do you process learning that your entire understanding of your origins was false? How do you integrate two versions of your identity? How do you hold space for both grief over what was lost and gratitude for the life you built? According to Alida, Luis has some memories of being kidnapped and transported across the country. But the adults who raised him never explained what had happened. They let him grow up believing their story was the only story. Whether this was an act of mercy or an act of additional cruelty is impossible to judge from the outside. Perhaps they convinced themselves they were protecting him. Perhaps they genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. Or perhaps they knew exactly what they had done and chose silence as their shield. The FBI continues to investigate the kidnapping itself. Even though 7 decades have passed, even though the primary actors are likely deceased, justice still matters. Understanding what happened matters. Creating a complete record matters. Because Luis Armando Albino isn't just one boy stolen from one park. He represents thousands of cases. He represents every family that has lost a child and never gotten answers. He represents every person who has lived a life built on stolen ground without knowing it. Alida has said she hopes her story gives hope to other families searching for missing loved ones. I was always determined to find him, she said. And who knows, with my story out there, it could help other families going through the same thing. I would say, don't give up. Don't give up. 3 simple words that represent decades of persistence. A grandmother who never stopped believing. A niece who took a DNA test, just for fun, and changed everything. A brother who got to hug his sibling one more time before dying. A man who learned his true name. The story of Luis Armando Albino doesn't have a neat ending because real life rarely does. It has a resolution, but not every question is answered. It has a reunion, but not everyone lived to see it. It has justice in the form of truth, but not in the form of punishment for those who did wrong. It has hope, but it's complicated by loss. What it definitely has is proof that time doesn't heal all wounds, but truth can. That family isn't just who raises you, but also who you come from. That identity is both chosen and given. And that sometimes, against impossible odds, the boy who vanished can be found again.